All right. After several weeks of media commotion following the shootings that occurred in Uvalde, Texas, Buffalo, New York, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and several others, all of this commotion has kind of led to a big crescendo, and the result of that is House Bill 7910. So just a few words on House Bill 7910. And then some basic data points just to see if it's actually going to address or alleviate some of this crisis issue that we appear to be in. And also some discussion about perhaps what some of the problems are. What are the causes of these mass public shootings? And can we actually address that in a meaningful way rather than racing to ban weapons as a sole means of addressing it? So let's take a look at that a little bit. First of all, House Bill 7910, also known as the Protecting Our Kids Act. Basically, I can break it down for you very simply. There are about 5 or 6 fundamental categories that involve changes or bans, and so here they are. The large capacity magazines that you hear about, this is 30 round and up, those would be banned federally in this act. Another feature is that the 80% lower receiver frames that hobbyists purchase, and they have to buy special jigs and aluminum milling tools, and they will complete the receiver and then assemble all kinds of parts and turn it into a rifle. Those are going to be effectively formally banned in this act. Straw man purchases in here are detailed as another crime, and something that has been a crime. It's never been legal to purchase a firearm for the sole purpose of giving it to someone else who's unable to acquire it on their own. So perhaps they just quantified it a little different, or maybe increased the penalties here. It's not clear to me. Raising the age to purchase a firearm from 18 to 21, that's another feature. There are some elements of safe storage in here where they're trying to address how firearms are kept, and assigning some responsibility and obligation to gun owners, and a formal ban on what they call bump stocks. So that's not thorough, but that's a fairly good look at the basics of it. And so when you compare that to some basic statistics, which I'm going to do now, it's very easy to connect the dots to see what may alleviate some of this problem and what might not. So first of all, I think one thing that needs to be cleared up, and it's unfortunate that this has to be established every time this conversation is had, but part of a political movement has been really successful in perpetuating this untruth. And so for anyone who doesn't know this, the AR in AR-15 does not stand for assault rifle. It doesn't mean assault rifle. It never did. AR stands for, it's an abbreviation for the manufacturer, Armalite, who began producing this weapon and gave it the name AR-15. They also make an AR-10. You see how this works. Their models begin with AR. So it really wasn't, had nothing to do with the product itself, and it was the work of clever Washington attorneys and lobbyists who were able to generate constant use of this term in much the same way that they insert these political correct terms and foist them on the rest of society. And before you knew it, assault rifle is rolling off the tongue, and even people who understand this and use them, I even catch myself saying it now and then, though less and less as time goes by. Anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way because it's just an inconvenient hurdle to have in every single conversation, that we cannot understand the truth of what that actually means. And so, that being said, the definition of public mass shooting is problematic to begin with, and that is because there is no set definition. Nothing has been established. So I could have a mass shooting, for example, at a family reunion where many people were shot and killed, but that doesn't qualify necessarily as a public mass shooting because the audience was very specific and the intention was clear. It was a result of some argument with family, let's say. So that wouldn't qualify. But in some other areas, in some other institutions, that would qualify as a definition. So the first thing to note is that we have an elastic definition there of what a public mass shooting is. So anytime that you investigate this on your own, always establish that first. What are we actually talking about? Are we talking about intent? Are we talking about location? Are we talking about the number of victims? For most definitions, it's at least 3 victims, sometimes 4, will have occurred in public and done in sort of a random fashion. Even if the area was targeted, it wasn't the specific people. It was only targeted perhaps because it was known to be crowded, let's say. Okay, in 2020, 38 total people were killed in public mass shootings. In those cases, a rifle was used 10% of the time. Public mass shootings account for 0.1% of the total of all gun homicides committed between 2000 and 2014. The average age of the shooters in public mass shootings is 34 years old. And there is, to date, 0 empirical evidence to suggest that banning high-capacity magazines would slow any of these people down. It takes the uninitiated person, on average, once you hand them a rifle and show them how to do it, between 2 and 4 seconds to change a magazine. So the notion that if we could just have those capped at 15 or 20 rounds, the Virginia Tech shooter was in a state that had limited capacity magazines, so he bought 20 of them. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to think your way around that. The idea that that would slow anyone down or prevent anything, I think, is just silly. But we'll come back to the Virginia Tech incident. I think what's important here is to note that everything that this House Bill 7910, everything that it proposes to do, nothing would address the problem. And let me explain by anecdote. So the 3 worst mass shootings that we have, the Virginia Tech shooter killed 32 people and injured 17. Now, he did this with 2 handguns, and it was in Virginia where he could only purchase 10 and 15 round magazines. So he didn't have high capacity magazines and didn't have a rifle. Killeen, Texas is another. 23 people killed and 20 injured. There again, 2 9mm handguns. In that case, 15 and 17 round magazines. Neither were considered high capacity. And the third one is San Ysidro, California. 21 people killed and 19 injured. And this was done with 2 handguns and 1 shotgun. 13 and 20 round magazines in the handguns respectively, and the shotgun capacity was at 5 rounds. So in none of those cases would the bump stock ban or the 80% lower receiver ban or any of these other ideas, the high capacity magazine ban, straw man purchases, I'm not entirely sure of, though I don't know that these were acquired criminally. I don't believe any of these shooters were under the age of 21, though I do not have that data, so that's possible. However, to speak to that point, the average age of the shooters is 34, so to raise the age to own a firearm from 18 to 21 is going to do what? It's not clear. So to ban 80% receivers and high capacity magazines and raise the age and all of these other things, try and beef up the straw man purchase laws and some safe storage acts and no more of those bump stocks, will do precisely 0 to address public mass shootings. which is unfortunate because that means that a bunch of new regulations will be passed. There will be an encroachment on people's rights. The people who obey those laws will be the ones who suffer, and nothing out of that will positively benefit, impact, or affect in any way, so far as I can see, these public mass shootings. So, I suppose part of the country will feel good, feeling like, well, we got some things done. And of course, the left will celebrate because they will know that now they can claim we've got so much more work to do and they can stay on this issue. And I think the right will probably try to claim some sort of victory in that they compromised and got a few things done, even though it effectively won't change anything, which is really unfortunate. So, it's puzzling to me that we continue to go after the weapon every time this happens, because it's the weapon isn't getting up and doing this. It's the person with the motive behind the weapon. So suppose in some perfect world that we were able to completely ban all guns. We gathered them all up, suppose it were possible, and just melted them into a big ball and dumped them in the ocean, or whatever we did. And so if that happened, have we really solved the problem? I would argue no, because you have a society that's producing criminally minded, vengeful, vindictive people who want to just take out this revenge on all of society and go down in this blaze of glory. So even if we could ban all the guns and collect them up and get rid of them, you still haven't done anything. You'll still have people in society who are walking around vengeful and hateful, wanting to enact that rage on society. Why would you think that taking the guns away would just solve the problem? The problem is that we have people thinking and behaving that way in society to begin with. The fact that they could get a gun is secondary to that. What in the hell's wrong with people that they're walking around with this mindset anyway? How are we producing this? It's not limited to the United States, but it doesn't happen very often in other places. So this is a phenomena that we can own and have a look at here and see if we can solve. So it's clearly not the weapon, because the weapon doesn't have a motive or an intention. I hear a lot about mental health, and I would, just a word of caution there. When you say it's mental health, I don't automatically disagree, because I think that it probably could be defined as a mental health issue. However, from a perspective of criminality, I worry when I hear people arguing for this mental health angle, because that's the angle that you argue in court when you want to try and remove all responsibility for what you've done. And none of these shooters has struck me so far, and all the ones that I've seen over the years, not a single one of them has struck me as someone who is clearly mentally ill, had no idea what they were doing in the moment of their actions, and cannot be held criminally responsible. No. So I just am suggesting a note of caution as we proceed with this notion of mental illness being a cause. Now, if we take it in its broadest sense and say, well, we have a sick society that's producing these people, well, maybe we can have a conversation about that. So what then about our society is producing these maniac people that are hell-bent on taking vengeance out on society and going down in a blaze of glory? How are we ending up with so many of these? It's not all copycat crimes. What is it? Well, imagine the environment today. If you're a young man, let's say, and you're growing up and you're in school, and you no sooner arrive there and you begin to realize that masculinity is a problem, that it's viewed as negative, you're told that it's toxic, and all of these instincts and habits that you will have as a young boy who's growing and developing and needs to interact with other boys and do things that boys do. When you squash that and suppress that and tell them that's bad, it's wrong, you can't behave like that, you're essentially responsible. People who look like you and people who have behaved like you are responsible for all of of the ills in the world, and you start pumping this critical race theory into their heads and giving them these wild ideas about gender, like that it's just a social construct and there's nothing else to it. It's not biologically rooted. Doctors are just taking a wild guess, stab in the dark when they see a newborn. And so the entire thing, regardless of genitalia, is nothing more than a social construct. And so now we have people who are competing in professional sports, and it's really eroded women's sports. That's simply true. What I just said is true. So you may not like that, or you may think that that's an inconvenient fact to point out, or that it's rude to say so, and you might be perfectly well to do so, but it's no less true. And so it's something that we need to wrestle with. You can't begin teaching children that a basic tenet of fundamental biological reality that they know instinctively, just like everyone else does. You can't lean on them and convince them that, well, no, you have to forget about that. This is a social construct. Everything is a social construct. So all those intuitions that you have, all the instincts that you have, if you have any of those male ones, they're masculine, and that's bad, that's toxic. And oh, by the way, you don't have enough melanin in your skin, and so we're going to spend a few years haranguing you on a daily basis about that and running you through exercises where you are made to feel guilty in front of other kids that you have never even met, and feel ashamed of how you look and who you're related to in your lineage and that sort of thing. And when you keep turning those pressures on in society, and you keep putting kids into that pressure cooker where they're not even certain about basic tenets of fundamental reality anymore, and they've been made to feel and believe as though all of their own characteristics are bad, and they're the cause of all of the world's problems throughout history, then should it really surprise us that we are finding some small aggregate of them who are ending up so extremely isolated and extremely alienated and absolutely devastated from a standpoint of any hope of maturing or developing with any sense of confidence or encouragement, or the sense that I can belong in the society, or that it values me or needs me or wants me? When there's none of that, is it really shocking that there is some aggregate of kids who are going to end up in this extreme psychological crises where they go out and commit these heinous crimes? I don't think so. And I think it's very obvious why this is happening. Look how toxic our society has become. And, as we now see parents battling school boards, trying to get rid of critical race theory and gender ideology being imposed by these teachers who are in K through 12 now, and they are making sure that the next generation is even more indoctrinated by the time they arrive in college. And so I want to reinforce that, and this would be a good way to close this video, is a reminder that as you look out at the cancel culture we see now, and you see this wokeism spilling everywhere, you haven't seen anything yet. There is a tidal wave of woke on the way, because it's been brewing in K through 12. You see, when you make over the American institution and you bring people in under this rebranded Marxism, this diversity, equity, inclusion program, and some of these other notions of how we're going to achieve equity, and just the nonsense that's going on there. When you remake the universities that way and you staff them with Marxists, then you are simply guaranteeing that, by the way, this occurs in the social sciences primarily, which is where we educate the next generation of teachers. So now we make it heavily Marxist in these language arts courses and in these areas, some of the grievance studies, and they're indoctrinating the next generation of teachers. Well, those teachers go out and they move into the K through 12 positions all over the country, and now they've really stepped up Their energy is greater. Their focus on the political ideology of what they learned in the university is more of the goal for them, is to impose that than it is anything else that they learned, which, by the way, is very little now in terms of academic work or other areas. And so imagine now you're educating a generation of children with those teachers who are now in K through 12 of the Marxist mindset and agenda. So now, by the time that generation arrives at the university and they get to the professors can now start to see some of the fruit of their labor, because kids are beginning to arrive there already in this nutty, kind of broken, decoupled from reality in many ways mindset. And so that's why I think that would be a good way to explain why you see all of the insanity going on at college campuses across the country, and yet nothing at high schools. So somehow every high school in America seems to be outstanding, stellar. There are rarely issues. If there are, they're just handled within the college and or within the high school and then squashed, let's say. But somehow all of those kids who go through those institutions arrive at the university, and it's total chaos. Somehow they can't get along. There's fighting, and it's just unbelievable to think that. And so you're seeing everything pick up. You educate the teachers to be more Marxist. They go occupy K through 12, and they do just that. They send the next generation through even more revved up and ready to receive more indoctrination. They become the next generation of K through 12 after that. And you can see how in no time this gets out of control. So that would go to support what Yuri Bezmenov warned us about in 1970, which was the concept of aktivní мероприятия, or active measures. So his point was that Russia was not spending the bulk of its money on spying efforts to learn information about weapons and things, but that they were actually spending about 85% of their budget in order to poison our culture. So in order to do that, they simply came over here and they went into the feminist studies and the women's studies area, and they started playing games with language and encouraging these kinds of things and funding as much as they could. And you'd be surprised what you can do with a little bit of motivation. So I think we're probably looking at the remnants of what started as Soviet aktivní мероприятия, and then, of course, after 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, you can rest assured that the Chinese saw and knew the effectiveness of that immediately and ramped it up as fast as possible. And of course, they're continuing to do that with TikTok and other various levers that they use to manipulate and destroy any cohesion within the American populace whatsoever. I think we're really seeing that now. Everyone seems to have this sense of isolation, and the coronavirus lockdowns did this to us in many ways, but it goes beyond that. When these identities become socially constructed, so to speak, in that way, you are having a default feature of your own personhood completely denied. And at the same time, now you have people who seem to think and see the world a different way than you, and they are demanding that you use new language that they've come up with in order to reinforce their view of the world. So you are required to use language that invalidates your own view of the world. You have to mouth those on command now. Otherwise, there are often consequences, whether it's at work or online or wherever this is. And you need to do that because you have to play along in order to reinforce their new notion of everything being socially constructed. And so it's that kind of demand for acquiescence is astonishing. And so it really speaks to just how out of control this is. Lastly, Yuri told us when we are exposed to the ideology of the enemy without being challenged or counterbalanced by basic American values, what happens is people become programmed to respond to stimuli. The facts no longer matter. Real information is irrelevant. It will never persuade the person. They are simply programmed to respond to different stimuli. And we can see lots of examples of this abound. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll catch up with you on the next one.